In this third lecture, we're going to talk about how people interact with one another. It's often different in different cultures, but let's just spend a couple of minutes reviewing what we've covered so far. Remember, we said the three components of cross-cultural ministry: the sender, that's the missionary; M is the message, the gospel message; and then receivers, the people whom we've gone to. But then we said there's an unalterable law: doorstep, sitting room, kitchen. We desire to get into people's kitchens, the kitchen of their heart. The entrance door is the doorstep, and then into the sitting room. We don't rush straight into the kitchen, but we need to become accepted if we're going to be effective. But then we talked about glasses. Some glasses are more square rimmed, that gives me one way of looking at the world. But then I find I go to people and they have round rim glasses. So I need to see the culture, the world as they see it. But I've discovered that I have some blind spots, and I need to understand how I see the world and how it's different from the way that they see the world, so that I can adjust effectively. But as we said, we don't just throw tracts at people. We don't send it in a vacuum, as it were, but through interacting with people. And so I need to build close relationships with people to become accepted. Now, in my own culture, I know the rules of social interaction. For instance, regarding age, you can ask a child under 10, "Oh, Jimmy, how old are you?" "Oh, I'm 6. "Oh, that's nice." Someone more of my age, they'll probably tell you, "Do you know, I'm 77. But between the age of 10 and 70, in British culture, it's rude to ask someone, "How old are you?" But I went to Taiwan in Chinese culture, and it's not rude. People ask straight out, "How old are you?" And I had to learn to accept that this wasn't rudeness. It was just people being interested. And so in a cross-cultural situation, maybe I need to adjust the way I interact with people, because my desire is to bring change, that people might come to know Christ. Step one for bringing change is that firstly, I must change. But let's start off with a case study. Martin and Mary, a young married couple from England, are both English teachers currently working in Spain. They live in a small but comfortable flat in a building near the centre of the city, and are pleased to find that their neighbours on the same floor often stop to exchange greetings on the stairs. Martin and Mary feel they should get to know their neighbours better. On several occasions, they invite neighbours over to their apartment for a drink or a meal. Although the neighbours thank them for their offers, none of them ever comes over. What is more, although the neighbours seem to be very sociable, often entertaining large gatherings of their relatives during the weekends, Martin and Mary are never invited to these functions. As a consequence, they begin to feel uneasy in any interactions with the neighbours, believing that they are not really liked or wanted in the building. How would you explain to Martin and Mary the neighbours' apparent unwillingness to have any extensive personal interaction with them? The problem here is that in Spain, that families, extended families, like to get together a lot, and that's where their focus is, that's where their energies are used. Martin and Mary come from a British culture. It doesn't function quite the same way. The problem here was that the neighbours were sending a warm message: "Oh, hello, it's nice to see you, it's nice to get to know you." But the message that was being received by Martin and Mary, because the fact they were never invited to these people's homes, was, "We don't really like you living here." There's a very interesting example in Acts 14 when Paul was in Lystra. I find this fascinating. In Lystra, there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that, the man jumped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and rhees to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to Paul and Barnabas. But when the apostles, Paul and Barnabas, heard of this, they tore their clothes. See, here was a man who was lame. Paul prayed for his healing. He was healed. And when the locals saw this, they assumed that the gods had come to visit them and bless them. In fact, historically, the gods are supposed to have come before, but weren't entertained by the locals very well. And so this time they came back. The priest of Zeus and the locals felt, this time we've got to get it right. And so they got the bulls and the rhees. But the problem was, when Paul and Barnabas saw that they were going to use these bulls to offer sacrifices to them, they were horrified. And so to express their horror, what did they do? They tore their clothes. Now, if you remember, when Jesus was arrested and was asked by the high priest, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" And Jesus answered, "Yes, I am." Do you remember? The high priest was horrified by this. Jesus had blasphemed God. That's how he felt it was. And so to express his horror, what did he do? He tore his clothes. But the key question is, what did these hillbillies who raised sheep on the hillside, very different from the Jewish, educated, cultured Jewish on the plains, what did these Jewish people mean by tearing, when they saw Paul tear their clothes? You see, Paul and Barnabas were sending a message, horror. We're horrified what you're doing, and to express that, we tore our clothes. When the Lycaonians saw Paul and Barnabas tear their clothes, what did they think? Hey, what a shame. Such nice clothes. Why are these visitors tearing them? And so the message that Paul was trying to send was a very, very different message that was received by the locals. Isn't it interesting? And so when we talk about different cultures, we'll say some are more direct in the way they communicate, others are more indirect. Let me ask you, who would you say are more direct in the way they communicate? Well, let me have a go. There's Germans, aren't there? And Swiss, probably. And some Americans and Australians. What about Asians? We can't just say Asians. Singaporeans are probably more direct. Now, who are more indirect in the way they communicate? Well, I think of in Asia where I lived, there were Thai people who were more indirect, the Japanese. And so we need to understand, are the people we're going to more direct or more indirect? Let me ask you, I'm from the UK. What about the British? Are they more direct or more indirect? The answer is they're somewhere in the middle. Let me tell you a very nice story. In the UK, at a missionary training college, there were 4 people at a table having lunch, 2 Germans and 2 British people, I think. And everything had been eaten except 1 sausage sitting on a plate. And the British person at the table lifted the plate up and said, "Would anyone like to eat the sausage?" And one of the Germans there picked up his fork, said, "Ja, danke," and ate the whole sausage. And heard the poor British person sitting there. You see, the British person said, "Would anyone like to eat the sausage?" And to the direct German, "Yeah," he'd like to eat the sausage. But I think the British person was really hinting and saying, "Well, let's go half and half. Let's go half and half." But let me give you a personal example of a misunderstanding between direct and indirect communication. I used to be in charge of missionaries in the center of Taiwan, and they were at different churches. And one of the churches had a missionary there and was very unhappy with this missionary, and so got in touch with me and asked me to meet with the leadership of the church. So I went. Now, the missionary wasn't there, it was just the leadership of me. So I said, well, look, Martin, you sit there quietly while let people share their frustrations, why they were upset with this missionary. Well, after about 20 minutes, I felt that everyone who wanted to share something had shared. So I said to them, so do you want this missionary to leave the church, or do you want me to talk with the missionary to explain why they must change and how they must change, but the missionary can stay in the church? As soon as I tell you, as soon as I said this sentence, one of the leaders there said, Mr. Simons, haven't we been telling you this for the last 20 minutes? You see, I wanted them to say in a direct way, go or stay, yea or nay. But they felt that in an indirect way, they'd already sent their message quite clearly. They wanted the missionary to leave. And I had to apologize. Unfortunately, they were willing to forgive me. But the problem is, we don't just label cultures direct or indirect. Oh, Germans are all direct and Japanese are indirect. No, we interpret their behavior. Oh, they are ill-mannered, and judge it by our standards. They're not civilized. So let's just think about, say, Germans. Do they like being direct? Yes, else they wouldn't do it. When I'm talking to you in a direct way, what? I'm being honest and being straightforward. So what about those indirect Japanese? Well, they can't be trusted. Supposing we're a team, all right? I'm the leader and all the team members were from Japan. And I said, this evening, I want everyone to be here at 6 o'clock because we're going to take tracts and distribute them at the local railway station. Remember, 6 o'clock here. And one of the Japanese, she bowed her head and said, well, maybe it's a little difficult. And I said, now, Rieko, we're a team. We come here to evangelize. We want people to come to know Jesus. Be here at 6 o'clock. And Rieko continues to mumble, well, I'd like to, but etc. 6 o'clock comes. No Rieko. She never said she wasn't coming. You see, using my direct glasses, she never said she wasn't coming. But Rieko, in an indirect way, had let me know she wasn't coming, but my glasses didn't read her message. I remember my wife once said, she worked with students in Taiwan. She said, when you ask a student about coming to a meeting, and if they say, well, maybe or possibly be, the answer is actually won't be. But let's talk from the Japanese point of view. Do Japanese think indirectness is good? Yes, else they wouldn't be doing it. When I talk to you in an indirect way, what am I doing? I'm being sensitive to your feelings. And what about those direct Germans? They are ill-mannered and blunt. We're familiar with this verse, right? Speaking the truth in love. How would a German read this verse? Speaking the truth in love. How would a Japanese read this verse? Speaking the truth in love. What about you? Are you more direct or more indirect? Why not stop the video and spend a few minutes going through this? And the more A's and B's you had would imply you're more indirect. The more D's or E's you had would imply that you're more direct. Yet we've got to beware of stereotypes. All Germans are and all Japanese are. Secondly, personality. My wife and I, we're both British, but she is much more direct in the way she communicates with people. I'm much more indirect. And also, you find often young people and old people. Young people are often much more direct, and older people more indirect. So, direct versus indirect. Let's now look at another contrast, individual versus collective. The individual, it's my life, I have my plans, I decide what I'm going to do in the future. Those more from a collective culture, yes, I do have plans, how I want to spend my life, but maintaining harmony in the family, maintaining harmony in our village is more important. And so if the village or my parents decide against my plans, well, then I'm going to go along with them. Let's look at this. John is a missionary in Thailand. He has shared the gospel with a Thai university student several times. The Thai student responds well to the gospel message and seems to be very close to believing, but is unwilling to take the final step of accepting Jesus Christ as his Saviour. What might be the reason or reasons why? Now, obviously, there could be very different reasons, but it could be that he first wants to go home and talk it over with his parents before making the final decision. But me, maybe from a more direct culture, doesn't understand that. In the church we attended in Taiwan, there was a Dr. Lin. Now, Dr. Lin became the deputy mayor of Taichung City, where we live, which is the second largest city in Taiwan. It's important. And after he'd finished that, he then became head of the water company of Taiwan. Well, Dr. Lin's wife was already a Christian, and then Dr. Lin became a Christian. So he went to see his elderly mother and said, I'd like to be baptized. And his mother said to him, all right, you can be baptized, but only after I have died. Now, if I come from an individualistic culture, I would say, now look, Dr. Lee, you've been deputy mayor, you're head of the water company, you've got hundreds of doctorates, you make your own decision, it's your own life, you don't need to listen to your mother. But Dr. Lee waited till his mother had died, and shortly after she died, he was baptized in our church in Taiwan. Well, who are you? Are you more direct? Or are you more individualistic or more collective? The more A's and B's you have, more collective. The more D's and E's, more individual. Why not stop the video again for a couple of minutes and do this self-assessment? Okay, we've talked about some people are more direct, some are more indirect, some are more individual, some are more collective. And let's look at the third group. Some are very big on status hierarchy, where others are more equal. With status and hierarchy, we think of certain Asian cultures, the Japanese, the Chinese, Koreans are very big on status and hierarchy. All people equal, maybe we think of Americans. How to know quickly whether a country is hierarchical is if they use a lot of titles. You see, in the UK, we use very few titles except in the military. Where when I went to Taiwan, I had to remember in church to call this person Elder Chen, and in school, Headmaster Lee, and Director Wang. Obviously, in the UK, we don't use titles like that. Now, why is this important? It's important as to whom you share the gospel with, who has influence in this society, who can influence other people. Here are two well-known, famous missionaries. Hudson Taylor, the founder of the China Inland Mission in 1865, and Matteo Ricci, a wonderful Jesuit missionary who went to China in 1582. Let's first talk about Matteo Ricci. He knew that China was a hierarchical society. And so when he arrived in China, he arrived in the south of China, where was he heading for? Beijing and the Imperial Palace. And to fascinate those in Beijing who are hierarchical, the emperor and others, he took with him some clocks, which fascinated them. And they were so fascinated, they allowed him to stay in China, in Beijing, near the Imperial Palace. You see, Matteo Ricci said, China is a hierarchical society. If I can influence those for Christ who have influence in society, God willing, it will sort of trickle down through society. 300 years later, and China by then was very different, Hudson Taylor arrived. Most missionaries in those days were on the coast of China. Hudson Taylor decided to send his missionaries inland, and that's why it was called the China Inland Mission. And so all his missionaries went inland to plant churches. But we can see that Matteo Ricci's strategy, whether it resulted in a lot of people become Christians, that's not the question. He recognized that China is a hierarchical society. And if I can influence those who have influence on others, God willing, if I can bring them to Christ, they can influence others to Christ. And so the goal is that I want people to change, but maybe I need to change first so that I don't become an obstacle to people becoming Christians. I think this once again points up to the need for long-term missionaries. And so here's something for you to think about for a few minutes. We thought about direct and indirect, individual, collective, status, hierarchy, and all people are equal. Is your home culture changing? And if so, in what way? And secondly, something different. If you have lived in another country for a while, maybe doing a short-term mission trip, have you experienced misunderstandings because the cultural norms there are different from your home country? Can you give an example? Why not, if you've got other people there, discuss this with them. All right, we're now just going for a few minutes to move on to something else. This is going back to the problem with our glasses, spectacles that give us problems because of the blind spots. And we're going to think about human perception. And the problem is that we have selective perception that gives us blind spots. Tell me, is this a picture of an old lady or a young lady? An old lady or a young lady? Now, some people really struggle with this. Here's the old lady, here's her nose, and here's her chin. Here's the young lady, her eyebrows, her nose. So the old lady is looking this way, the young lady is looking that way. If you still can't get it, just stop the video and see if you can understand what's happening. So, our problem of selective perception. In Hokkien, this is pronounced bei, this is pronounced bei. One is a voiced B, another is an unvoiced B. I tell you, it took me 5 years, and then I think I could distinguish it. Bei, bei. The problem with my hearing, or rather my perception. I think what we find sometimes with those from Japan and Korea, the L and the R. I remember I was teaching at Wycliffe Bible Translators, and this Korean arrived as the beginning of a new school year. And he said to me, "Where is the playroom?" And I knew what he was wanting to say. Where is the pray room? L and R can be a big problem. But let me tell you about where, again, I got it all terribly wrong. In Taiwan, I used to write Chinese textbooks with our language school for missionaries who were learning Chinese. And we had one textbook called Old Testament Stories that helped us to be able to read the Old Testament more fluently. It was written by the head of the department that wrote textbooks, a Mrs. Wang, or Director Wang. But I felt it was time that it should be revised slightly. Well, in our mission, we had a lady, Ruth, who was Taiwanese, but had got a master's degree in linguistics in the UK, and I thought she'd be ideal. So I said to Ruth, would you come with me and we'll have a meeting with Director Wang to see if she can allow us to revise this textbook. So we went along there, and I did most of the talking, and after about 30 minutes, Mrs. Wang said, okay. So shortly afterwards, Ruth and I left, and we walked up the road going back to the office. I said, isn't that wonderful? She said, you can revise it. And Ruth turned to me and said, no, she didn't. I said, yes, she did. Maybe my Chinese isn't that great, but she said, 可以, which means yes, means okay. Yes, Martin, but did you notice that while you were talking, she was holding her handkerchief and were wiping the beads of perspiration from her forehead? You see, verbally, she said yes, but her body language said, no, no way. And that textbook was never revised. All right, that's that. Well, that's that. Perception, selective perception. Let's look at another one to do with categorization. Here is tomatoes. Are they vegetables or are they fruit? I remember as new missionaries to Taiwan, we were invited to a Taiwanese home for a meal. And we had the main course, and after that, he said, would you like some fruit? I said, oh, that would be nice, thank you. And he disappeared into the kitchen and came out with a plate with some apples and oranges and bananas on it, and some of these small tomatoes. I thought, what are they doing there? They're vegetable. But to a Taiwanese person with his squaring glasses, small tomatoes are fruit. Large tomatoes are vegetables. I've also mentioned before about fruits that Chinese see some as more heaty, while others are cooling. So lychees and pineapples are more, lychees and cherries are more heaty, where pineapple and watermelon is more cooling. Well, I'll tell you, I just love lychees. I just love lychees. And the season's not very long, so once they're ripe, I buy as many as I can. But my Taiwanese friend said, if you have a cold, it's best not to eat lychees because they're heaty. Well, I don't care whether or not I've got a cold. I'm going to eat lychees. And my Taiwanese friends look at me and think, he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. I don't know if you heard of the Maasai people in Kenya. These are things that are part of their world. And this is how they would categorize them. One category would be birds, stones, grass, fish, sand, tree. Another category is whales, lions, and men. Another category is cows and women. Another category is germs, gods, angels, viruses, and spirits. Now, how do their glasses categorize these? Well, firstly, birds, stones, etc. are free for the taking. These whales, lions, and men are seen as rulers. Cows and women are bride price, dowry. And germs, gods, angels, viruses, and spirits can kill you. And that's how they categorize these things. That's categorization. Another area we can think about is interpretation. Dogs, are they pets Or are they food in the culture you're going to? Let's move on quickly, in case you get upset. And so, concerning perception, we assume our glasses see it objectively. But because of my glasses, I have selective perception. And it's something I need to adjust to when I go to my new culture. So that's one area, selective perception. A second area is stereotyping. Americans, all Americans drive big cars. Okay, British people, all British people have high tea at 4 in the afternoon. Japanese people, all Japanese people are very polite. And the problem is most of our stereotypes are very outdated. Not all British people have high tea at 4 o'clock, only aristocracy. Now, although stereotyping can be, as it were, dangerous, it can have its uses. For instance, I'm at a conference in the UK and I'm in charge of refreshments, and someone told me there are going to be a lot of Americans coming to this conference. So I think, oh, Americans, they like to drink Coke and they like to drink coffee, where British people like tea. So I better put out more Coke and more coffee. That's good to think that way. Or for instance, I'm going to Papua New Guinea to do training. Now, when I do training in the UK, I use a logical, reasoning, deductive, step-by-step approach. But someone tells me in PNG, that's not how they educate people. They do it through stories and the message the story brings. And so I think, well, look, Martin, if you want your teaching to be effective in PNG, you better change your approach and put in more stories. So that can be helpful. But coming back to stereotyping, it can be a problem. You see, I label people. You see, all Thai are indirect, and then I judge them. And because I judge them like this, it can spoil intercultural team harmony. You see, British people, no, I can't say British people, English people will often say Scottish people are mean. Now, supposing I have a task, I have to build a hospital, but I first need to go and raise funds for this hospital, and someone's given me a name list, and I see on it MacDonald. I think, oh, MacDonald, he's Scottish. He's probably very mean. I won't waste my time going to see him. But actually, MacDonald might be a very generous man. And think of Mexicans. They're lazy. They sleep for 2 hours at noon, you see. Now, I've got to get this hospital built. I need people who are going to work hard. And I see on my name list of people I can employ Olinto. And I think, oh, he probably sleeps for 2 hours at lunch. I won't bother to employ him. But actually, maybe Olinto is very hard working. Actually, in the mission group I belonged to, we had a Brazilian whose name was Olinto. And he and I had arranged for him to come to my home at 7:30 at night. About 7:20, the phone rang. It was Olinto. He was saying, Martin, I'm sorry, I'm going to be 5 minutes late. I said, Olinto, you don't need to call me. Brazilians never arrive on time. Just come when you can. And I offended him deeply, because Olinto was someone who prided himself on arriving on time. I think he'd actually lived in the UK for a while and got used to that. But anyway, I had to go and apologize to him. So negative stereotypes can spoil relationships. But what's interesting, actually, stereotypes, we also can have positive stereotypes. The British are conservative. They're all gentlemen. I remember years ago when we were in China and Chinese people started going to the UK to study, I used to have to warn them. I had to tell them, look, not all British people are gentlemen. You see, their problem was, how did they decide that British people are gentlemen? Because they've seen some movies, My Fair Lady or Sound of Music. I said, I'm sorry, not all British people are gentlemen. So that's stereotyping. It can often be It can often harm intercultural relationships, and we need to be aware of that. But something even more that we have to be careful of is a sense of superiority, ethnocentrism, sense of superiority as regards our own culture. In this place where I'm living, the traffic is chaotic. In a civilized country, which of course is mine, in a civilized country, people obey the traffic rules, you see, that sense of superiority. Or, for instance, how many hours a day should someone work? You see, in our country, it's 8 hours a day, you see, 9 till 5. And I, as a hardworking person, I work 9 to 5. And so this keeps my self-esteem afloat. But according to my standards, Mexicans are lazy. They sleep for 2 hours. But the other way, Japanese, I'll tell you, they're too hard working. They do overtime. They work at weekends. You see, I'm judging people by my standards. In the UK, on the BBC, they had a documentary. It was about the Toyota car company that set up a factory in the UK. To begin, the bosses were all Japanese and the workers were all British. To begin with, it went well, but then as the order books became full, the Japanese said to the British workers, listen, we need you to do overtime during the week and come in at weekends. And the British people said, now look here, mate, we've signed this agreement that says 8 till 5, 5 days a week, and we're sticking to it. And it caused tremendous problems. Let me show you this. Here's a world map. I think it was printed in England, and there's the UK in the middle. And I think that's how world maps should be printed, because it's a sort of balance, isn't it? There's America and Canada on the left, and Russia and East Asian countries on the right. I think world maps ought to be printed like that. But then I went to China, and I discovered the country in the middle was China. And I said to my Chinese friends, what's it doing there? They said, China, the Middle Kingdom. Of course it should be in the middle. And where's my country gone to? Oh, right to the edge. So whether it's selective perception or a stereotyping or a sense of superiority, these can all create problems in international teams. And we have to be careful of pride and prejudice and do our best to maintain harmony for the sake of the gospel. I hope you found that helpful.